Hello, my name's Alasdair Paine, and I invite you to turn with me right now to Genesis chapter 4, verses 19 down to 24. Lamech married two women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the harp and flute. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Now I want to ask this question: how is it that we make sense of the mixed up world which we live in? Isn't it a mixed up world? On the one hand, it's a world of tremendous progress and many things to celebrate. At the other side, it's a world of terrible atrocities, and they're all mixed up together. You turn on the TV and you look at the news, and sometimes you see something amazing, some medical breakthrough, or some amazing new cultural achievement. But so much of the news is dominated by bad news, isn't it? War and famines and all the rest of it. Those of us who live in or near London were particularly struck by this question, I remember, in 2005. 2005 was a great summer for London because we had the announcement that the Olympic Games in 2012 are going to be located right here. But on the very day that people were sitting on the tube trains in London reading their newspapers about that news, many of them were killed by gigantic terrorist bombs. And you have this dilemma. The world we live in, wonderful things to celebrate like the Olympics, and at the same time terrible atrocities. How do we make sense of this? Well, come with me to Genesis 4. It's an unfamiliar corner of the Bible, and I want you to meet a family right at the dawn of civilization who in their life hold the key to understanding this question. On the one hand, this family are a family of high achievers. Have a look at verse 17. There we read about Cain, and we're told he was building a city. And then look at his descendants. As you go down through a number of people with unpronounceable names, you get to his descendant Lamech, who married 2 women, Adah and Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. And his sister was called Naamah. Look at this family for their talent. There's Lamech, the dad, and there are these 3 boys. Jabal is the one who's responsible for the beginnings of farming, Jubal for the beginnings of music and culture, and Tubal-Cain, the beginnings of science and technology. You know, in Britain we have this strange habit every year, and I know that they have it in many other countries of the world, of sending out with Christmas cards these Christmas letters, and I read through these things and see the fascinating achievements of my friends' children as they delight to tell us all the amazing things they've done. Can you imagine what this family would have had on their Christmas letter? It's been a great year. Jabal's invented farming, Tubal-Cain's invented technology, and so on. But the point the writer is making is there is so much to celebrate in human achievement, even in this one family. And yet mixed in with all that, as you read on through the passage, there is so much else to be much less proud of. Cain, their ancestor, wasn't just a city builder, he was the first murderer in the Bible. And the father of these talented boys, Lamech, it turns out, was a brutal man. Verse 23, he said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. He's been out in the fields, somebody has hurt him, and he's killed this man in complete disproportion to the original offence, and he's boasting in it. He's a man who epitomizes brutality and revenge. And that, in this one family, is our world in a nutshell, isn't it? On the one hand, we've had astonishing advances in culture, in the arts, in science and technology. I suppose, particularly in the last 100 years, the science and technology. We've got antibiotics, amazing improvements in medicine, genetic engineering, jet aircraft, space flight, nuclear energy, computers, telecoms, plastics, marvellous improvements. You know, you look around medical museums or something like that and you think, I'm so glad to live in the 21st century and not in the 19th. So great advances. And yet at the same time, just as in this family, horrific aspects as well. The past 100 years have been marked by violence on such a colossal scale, haven't they? We've had recently the 90th anniversary of the end of World War I, which was described naively as the war to end all wars. Then World War II with 17 million casualties. Since then, Stalin's purges, Mao's Cultural Revolution, Cambodia's killing fields, the genocide in Rwanda, the conflicts in Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Zimbabwe, Darfur and Congo, and global terrorism on a frightening scale. Now come back to the passage and you see how the writer of Genesis puts these two things together. Human achievement, great things to be proud of on the one hand, and yet human atrocity on the other, mixed up all together in the same family. And that raises the question, well, why is this so? We have to travel back a little earlier in the book of Genesis to find the answer, where both sides of the story are presented. If you turn back to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, it says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. What does that mean? God has made us in some special way to be just like him. In what way? Well, one resemblance in particular is that just as God is the ruler of the universe, he's given us a share in his rule. He's given us the capacity to rule over the world he's put us into. And this is expressed partly in the astonishing capabilities he's given us through the development of culture and technology and science and civilization. And it's because we're made in God's image that we're able to put on something as sophisticated as the Olympic Games, or to build computers, or to write a Mozart symphony, if you're Mozart. That's one side of the human condition. But what about the other? What about the evil in human nature? Well, the Bible's answer, of course, comes in chapter 3 of Genesis, where we're told that the first people wanted to be like God, knowing good and evil. The first people weren't just content to have God's authority and power to rule over the world. They wanted to have God's own personal role of deciding for themselves what's right and what's wrong, of discerning or knowing good and evil. And there's another word for that, rebellion. And if we do this and we put ourselves at the centre of our worlds, the consequences are devastating. Murder, hatred, immorality, dishonesty, injustice. They all come from wanting to make ourselves number one, wanting to serve ourselves, wanting to have our own moral code. Now there, in a nutshell, is the explanation for the extraordinary situation we find ourselves in. On the one hand, we're made in God's image, so we're wonderfully clever and powerful. And yet on the other hand, we've become rebels against him, so we're corrupted in our nature. Now come back to Genesis 4. And in Lamech's family, you see that you have both of these characteristics there in the same family. We all have an instinctive temptation, don't we, to divide the world into goodies and baddies. But the Bible isn't so naive. There is civilization, achievement, science, technology, and brutality all mixed in together. The one doesn't remove the other. Now, this passage has a vital message for you and me today. This passage helps you and me to avoid false hopes, thinking that we have it in ourselves to solve our basic human problems. The human race is always making that mistake. of thinking we can dig ourselves out of the hole that we're in. And we make that mistake because we are so very good at science and culture and technology and civilization and all of those things. And so our natural tendency all down through human history has been to look to these for the answer. The Victorians thought of it like that. In 1851 they had a great exhibition in London, and the theme of the exhibition was progress with a capital P. And people were thinking then, as they've thought all down the centuries, that somehow we can improve our own situation and deal with the problems that the world faces entirely on our own terms. The same hope is held out to us again and again by our political leaders. Just improve education, just put more money into technology, just improve learning and culture, and all will be well. And we believe that because there is a measure of truth in it. Education is a good thing. Science and technology are great things when they're properly used. But what Genesis 4 has us all know is the utter frustration that none of these achievements in the end will be able to deal with the heart of the human problem, which is the problem of the human heart. And I take it that's why, as we read this section of Genesis with this little passage where when we first see it we wonder why it's there, we see the celebration of the family's achievements coming just before we read about what their father was like. As if the writer is saying, all that, oh dear, but now this. Almost as if the writer of Genesis all those thousands of years ago was saying, yes, humanity will make great progress. But do you know what else you'll do? You'll build bigger bombs. And in a world that rebels against God, that is the way it will always be. That is, in fact, later on in the Bible we learn, the way God allows it to be. So we will see for ourselves how wrong it is to try to be like God ourselves, wanting to run the world without reference to him. That's a fact we must face before we begin to realize that instead we need to seek God's solution. There's just a hint of that there. If you look back to Genesis 4, verse 26, at that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. As if the writer wants us to know that in God, the Lord alone, the full answer can come. And of course, the rest of the Bible is about that answer. It involves a man dying on a cross to reconcile us to God. It involves a man rising from the dead and sending his Spirit to change us from the inside so we can use our God-given abilities as he wants. It involves a glorious future with a new heavens and a new earth promised to those who've been saved by Christ. Doesn't reading this section with its realism make you want to read on and see how that solution works?